Over the years, however, the definition has evolved and varies across countries, depending on cultural context. In most places, it is classified as a severe crime against women, including assault, maiming, or causing death, perpetrated by men amid gender-based animosity. It's often said that women allow themselves to be mistreated, not reporting to police or leaving the men who cause them emotional and physical suffering, and sometimes even continuing to live with someone who might end their life at any moment. This claim is only partially true, as in some countries, the law inherently sides with men, giving them confidence that they will face no repercussions. The story of a young woman named Abril Perez is one of the most vivid examples of how femicide thrives among the affluent sectors of Mexican society. She and her husband, Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez, were wealthy and respected individuals, holding executive positions in major companies, and from the outside, their marriage seemed flawless. Yet this did not prevent the man from abusing his wife over the years and eventually having someone else violently end her life, also risking the lives of their children. To this day, this case remains unresolved, and all but the main perpetrator have been punished. Abril Perez, family and early years. Abril Sagaon. Perez was born on November 18, 1971, in Monterrey, in the northeastern part of Mexico, and was the second of 3 children to parents Maria del Socorro Sagaon and Manuel Perez. Raised alongside her older brother Javier and younger sister Ama, the family lived modestly, but her parents did everything possible to provide their children with a good education and motivate them to aspire to a better life. All the children excelled in school, engaged in music, sports, and other talents. Abril, in particular, showed a talent for mathematics and entrepreneurial skills from an early age. She was an avid reader and the top student in her class. As a teenager, Abril began working to achieve financial independence, was frugal, and always had savings. From her school days, she was very disciplined, able to plan and manage her time effectively. She dreamed of obtaining a high-quality higher education to secure a well-paying job with career advancement opportunities. After finishing high school, Abril was admitted to the most prestigious university in Nuevo León, where she earned a master's degree in finance and business administration. Her classmates described her as smart, incredibly focused and ambitious, but also cheerful, kind-hearted, and always ready to help others. Upon graduating, Perez was hired in the sales department of one of the country's largest and fastest-growing companies. A few years later, she ventured into digital sales, a new booming field, and realized this was her calling. Quickly rising through the ranks, she became the executive director of the company within 2 years. Abril was young, beautiful, successful, ambitious, and steadily advancing towards the life she had always dreamed of. She built a brilliant career, supported her family, and was full of plans for the future. Yet her personal life remained unsettled, which disappointed her loved ones. Nevertheless, she was confident she would find true love and live a long, happy life. Little did Perez know how her marriage to the perfect man would turn out. Meeting Juan Carlos. In the mid-1990s, as Abril's career was on the rise, fate brought her together with a young man named Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez. He was just 3 years her senior and equally ambitious career-wise, which greatly appealed to her. In return, he was captivated by her beauty, charm, kindness, and disarming smile, combined with a sharp intellect and remarkable determination. Sanchez was a graduate of a prestigious science and technology university, where he excelled in the economics and trade department. He later continued his education in the United States at Harvard University, after which he returned to Mexico and built a successful career in the relatively new field of e-commerce. The young professionals met at a conference dedicated to the latest financial technologies. They crossed paths several more times as their companies collaborated on joint projects, and eventually, Juan Carlos realized he had fallen in love with this intelligent beauty. Through mutual acquaintances, he obtained her phone number and decided to invite Perez out on a date. The feelings were mutual. She also found this educated, erudite man capable of holding a conversation on almost any topic, appealing and interesting. Their relationship developed quickly, and by 1998 the couple decided to formalize their relationship with a lavish wedding. By then, they had both achieved considerable career success and were involved in developing online stores, a very promising direction. Their life resembled a true fairy tale, evoking envy and admiration among their peers. Dark secrets of the perfect family. It wasn't until 2001, after 3 years of marriage, that the couple welcomed their long-awaited first child, a daughter they named Anna Cecilia. 30-year-old Abril was overjoyed, as the arrival of the child marked a new chapter in their lives. Her husband also seemed happy, treating their newborn daughter with tenderness and awe. 2 years later, Abril gave her beloved a son, whom they named after his father, Juan Carlos Jr. Another 2 years passed, and the family welcomed a third child, a boy named Julio Andreas. It's worth noting that the young mother hardly took any maternity leave and managed to brilliantly combine parental responsibilities with her career advancement. She prepared only homemade meals, helped the children with their schoolwork, took them to sports activities, and strived to be not just an ideal mother, but also their best friend. From the outside, the Perez Sanchez family appeared perfect in every way. Wealthy, successful, raising 3 wonderful children, having everything one could wish for, and seeming very happy. But appearances can be deceiving. What happened inside their home remained unknown even to the couple's closest relatives for a long time. In reality, Juan Carlos showed his true nature in the first years of their life together. He was hot-tempered, aggressive, and rather harsh, intolerant of compromise, insisting that everything had to be exactly as he wanted. But Abril was in love, and initially thought that over time they would rub along, and his character would soften. Moreover, their joint projects united them. They worked towards a common goal, and their teamwork yielded impressive results, including financially. However, over time, he became more irritable, and verbal altercations escalated into physical confrontations. After the birth of their first daughter, the husband briefly softened, trying to keep his emotions in check, but it didn't last long. The same happened after the birth of their eldest son, but by the time the third child was born, he no longer even tried to be a good father or husband. Juan Carlos vented his anger, negative emotions, or just bad mood on his wife, sparing no feelings. He insulted and belittled the mother of his children, and her tears seemed to lift his spirits. He then began to regularly physically harm his wife, often doing so in a way that left no visible marks on exposed parts of her body, so she could hide the bruises under clothing or mask them with makeup. All this was done with one simple purpose: to protect his flawless reputation and pride himself on being considered a model family man, loving husband, and father. Abril kept silent for years, trying not to tell even her sister and mother about the ongoing nightmare. She earned well and could have raised the children on her own, providing them with a good education and a stable upbringing. But her husband was a wealthy and very influential man, and he could easily take the children away from her through the courts. Knowing what Juan Carlos was really like, Perez could not bear the thought of her daughter and sons being left alone with a real monster, capable of anything, starting over with old problems. 2010 approached. The situation within the family escalated to its limit, to the extent that those who once considered this household ideal began to suspect something terrible was happening within. Abril was not just subdued, but deeply distressed, visibly thinner, sleeping poorly, and frequently had bruises on her face and body that became increasingly difficult to conceal and impossible for her to explain. Juan Carlos maintained a calm and confident demeanor, pretending that nothing was wrong. In public, he continued to play the role of a loving and caring husband, interacting with his wife politely and affectionately, but at home, he transformed into a monster, making it increasingly dangerous to be near him. Despite pleas from loved ones to divorce, Abril stubbornly insisted that everything was fine and that she would handle the problems with her husband herself. 2014 marked the peak of Sanchez's career when he became the head of a major trading company and one of the most influential people in the field. After this motion, The family moved to Mexico City and settled in a large house in one of the capital's best neighborhoods. Their children attended an elite private school, and a beleaguered Perez sincerely hoped that the move and complete change scenery would positively affect their relationship. Contrary to expectations, changed. The man continued to physically harm and insult his wife, increasingly doing so in front of their children. Furthermore, Juan Carlos began to groundlessly accuse his wife of infidelity, and whenever she tried to defend herself, he resorted to using his fists, claiming he would find evidence of her disloyalty. He monitored her phone and emails, forbade her from using social media, and later, finding no evidence, even hired a private detective to follow Abril and photograph any men who came near her. 2 attempts on her life. For another 4 years, the woman tried everything to save her marriage, though her husband's behavior became utterly unbearable. She lived in a never-ending nightmare that outwardly seemed like a happy and successful union. Many even envied Abril, as she had such a prominent, influential, wealthy, and as many thought, caring husband. In 2018, the Sanchez family traveled to Monterrey to celebrate Catholic Christmas with the Perez family. However, Juan Carlos behaved toward his wife as he was accustomed, not shying away from her parents, who were horrified by what they witnessed. At that moment, the woman realized things could not continue this way and informed her husband that she would file for divorce once they returned to Mexico City. Hearing this, in a fit of rage, he grabbed her throat and squeezed so tightly she nearly lost consciousness. Only her mother, Maria del Socorro, entering the room and raising the alarm, prevented a tragedy. When the family returned to their home in the capital, Abril, preparing for divorce, moved from the marital bedroom to a small guest room, but this did not save her from the tyrant. On the morning of January 4th, while she was still asleep, her husband entered the bedroom holding a baseball bat. He struck her hard on the head and was about to swing again. Half awake, Perez barely understood what was happening, but managed to slip off the bed just in time, literally saving her own life. The woman began to scream, and the children ran into the room, having heard the noise. The youngest son shielded his mother with his body, while the eldest son took the bat from his father. Together with their mother, they fled the house and headed to the hospital as Abril needed medical attention. Doctors diagnosed her with a serious concussion and a deep laceration above her eyebrow, which required stitches. Marital conflict. As soon as his wife and sons left the home, Juan Carlos contacted his lawyer to explain the situation and asked for help in resolving it. He also posted on his social media page, claiming that his wife had betrayed him, was unfaithful, and intended to leave him for another man, taking their children and attempting to take all their jointly acquired assets. Moreover, he claimed that his wife had stolen all the money from their home safe and that when he tried to stop her, she injured him with a knife in the shoulder. As proof, he posted photos of a bloodied knife and brown stains on the floor. However, the blood on the floor was actually Abril's from her own room, and the knife photo was taken from the internet. Nonetheless, Sanchez's friends believed his story and began actively sharing and reposting his account on their personal social media pages, calling for widespread attention to this egregious case. While still in the hospital, Perez filed a police report against her husband, accusing him of attempting to end her life. After being discharged, she moved out of their home, taking her sons with her, over whom she was granted temporary sole custody. Their eldest daughter, by then an adult who had finished school and moved to another city for college, also sided with her mother, condemning her father's cruel and unacceptable behavior. Sanchez was ordered to pay alimony to his ex-wife and sons while they stayed with their mother, although the amount was quite small, about $300, which he disagreed with. He himself faced a potential prison sentence, but the influential businessman was confident he would remain free and avoid any punishment. After enduring such a nightmare, Abril decided to return to her native Monterrey, to her parents' home, taking her children with her. It was there that she filed for divorce, and from there she monitored the situation. Meanwhile, she began offering help and online consultations to women in similar situations, and she planned to open a center for psychological and legal assistance for victims of domestic violence. Corrupt justice system. Only in September 2019, 8.5 months after the incident, was Sanchez finally arrested on charges of femicide, inflicting bodily harm and attempting to end his wife's life. He was placed in jail, where he spent over a month, but by November of that year, he managed to appeal the pretrial detention decision and was released. The case was presided over by Judge Federico Mas, who unexpectedly reclassified it, leading to a new trial. During the trial, photographs of Perez from the hospital and entries from her medical records were not presented, and the testimonies of the woman and her sons were deemed insufficient grounds for detaining Juan Carlos. Furthermore, the defendant insisted that his ex-wife was turning the children against him. The defendant was released directly from the courtroom, as Judge Mas considered that his actions did not pose a direct threat to the victim's life. According to the judge, if Sanchez had truly intended to end his wife's life, he would have followed through, especially since she was asleep during the attack and unable to resist. Abril was shocked and frightened by this turn of events. She realized that her ex-husband had utilized all his connections and paid off the right people to be set free, putting her and her children in danger. She sent an official letter to the judge expressing fear for her life, but it had no impact on the situation. Immediately after being released, Juan Carlos began legal proceedings against his ex-wife for custody of their sons. He forced her and the children to return to Mexico City to attend court sessions. Otherwise, the matter could be resolved in absentia, not in her favor, so she was compelled to return to the capital. Tragedy. Witnessed by children. On November 25th, Abril arrived in Mexico City with her children. She genuinely feared the man she had lived with for over 20 years and did not want to encounter him unnecessarily. She planned to leave the city the same day after the hearing and had already purchased plane tickets, which Juan Carlos knew about. Ironically, on that day, a mass demonstration against gender-based violence was taking place in the capital. Immediately after the court session, the woman, along with her sons and their lawyer, got into a car heading to the airport, but they never reached their destination. At a traffic light, a motorcyclist pulled up next to their car, unexpectedly drew a handgun, and fired twice at Perez, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, before swiftly fleeing the scene. One of the bullets passed through and grazed the younger son, who was sitting in the back seat, but fortunately, none of the children were seriously hurt. The injured woman was quickly taken to the nearest hospital, where doctors fought desperately for over 6 hours to save her life. Unfortunately, due to severe injuries and significant blood loss, they were unable to save 48-year-old Abril, who passed away that evening. The victim's parents, brother, and sister flew to the capital immediately and urged authorities to arrest Juan Carlos, convinced that he was behind this brutal act that occurred in front of the children. However, law enforcement had a different view, stating that without identifying the shooter, it was difficult to discuss his motives, and it could not be definitively claimed that it was a hitman sent by Sanchez. The case was not classified as femicide until further investigation. Predictably, Juan Carlos remained free, and the police began searching for the shooter, which could take an extended period. The orphaned children were temporarily placed under the care of their maternal relatives, while their father prepared to fight for them in court again. Abril's sister wrote an angry post on her social media account openly blaming Sanchez for the incident, but her page was soon blocked and later deleted. Nonetheless, the family decided to fight and draw heightened public attention to the case, highlighting that the attack on Perez happened on the day dedicated to fighting gender-based violence, public outcry, and the flight of the main suspect. The victims' relatives managed to draw attention to the tragedy that struck their family. Moreover, people openly discussed numerous cases where men attempted to end women's lives, but did not follow through and remained free without facing any punishment. Due to the significant public outcry, the General Prosecutor's Office of Mexico initiated a new investigation concerning Sanchez and was also instructed to check the legality of the actions of the judges who had released him. The judges handling Juan Carlos's case were temporarily suspended from work and later removed from their positions. Mexican politician and women's rights defender Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo officially confirmed that the Perez case had been reclassified as femicide and would be reinvestigated, and the judges who had released Juan Carlos could face consequences for the woman's death if his guilt was proven. The businessman regularly posted on social media calling for the perpetrator of his former wife to be found and punished to the fullest extent of the law. He also noted that despite the disagreements between him and Abril, he would never dare harm the mother of his children, let alone end her life in front of their sons. However, his daughter Ana Cecilia left an angry comment under one of these posts, accusing her father of cruelty and accompanying her words with photos of her mother taken in the hospital after Juan Carlos had attacked her with a bat. Despite the resonance and widespread media coverage of the case, it was decided to leave Sanchez free during the investigation. He was placed under a restraining order and required to check in weekly at a police station, but after he failed to appear at the appointed time, a warrant for his arrest was issued for violating the order. As one might guess, no one could find the accused. It turned out that the businessman again used his money and connections to quickly leave the country and enter the United States. Mexican authorities contacted Interpol, reporting the fugitive accused of a serious crime, and the next day, Sanchez was declared wanted almost worldwide. Arrest of hired criminals and reconstruction of the crime scene. During this time, efforts were underway to locate the hired criminal who, it turned out, did not work alone. Surveillance footage from street cameras clearly showed two vehicles following the car from the courthouse in which Abril, her children, and their lawyer were traveling. The motorcyclist, who later emerged and performed the lethal act, appeared to be in constant communication with the individuals in the aforementioned cars, receiving directions and instructions. It took investigators several months to identify just some of the participants of the incident, and it wasn't until March 5, 2020, that two suspects were arrested in connection to the case. Surprisingly, they did not resist arrest and almost immediately started giving testimonies, hoping to mitigate their sentences. It was confirmed that the orchestrator of the crime was indeed Juan Carlos, who had paid a substantial amount, with 7 people directly involved in carrying out the act. The first to be apprehended were the driver of one of the chase cars and the motorcyclist who fired the fatal shots. It emerged that, while in prison, Juan Carlos had hired a couple of seasoned criminals to protect him, acting as his personal bodyguards. One of these criminals was released a week before Sanchez, and the other was freed several days after him. Once out of prison, the businessman reconnected with them, asking them to find reliable people to carry out the elimination of a person, promising a substantial sum of money to each if successful. When all participants were identified, the orchestrator transferred the promised money and provided precise instructions about the route and vehicle Abril would be using. The most challenging part of the plan turned out to be luring his former wife to Mexico City. The man resorted to blackmail, threatening to take the children if she did not appear in court. Although she complied with the court appearance, she had no intention of staying in the capital, planning to return to Monterrey the same day, and Juan Carlos knew this from his sources. Despite this information, it wasn't until the end of October 2020 that 3 more participants in the criminal conspiracy were apprehended. Moreover, the arrest of these criminals was initially on suspicion of distributing controlled substances, and it was only at the police station that it was discovered these individuals could be involved in the high-profile crime. All arrested were part of a major drug trafficker, Juan Carlos Maldonado's gang, known as Juan Balto. He had served time with Sanchez and provided him protection, later agreeing to assist in eliminating his former wife for a hefty reward. Maldonado was arrested a couple of weeks later in November 2020. He began giving testimonies, confirming that the businessman had sought reliable individuals to end his ex-wife's life, and he agreed to help him in return for a substantial reward. There was no doubt left that Sanchez was both the client and organizer of the crime, and his previous assault on Abril with a bat was officially reclassified as an attempt on her life, leading the court to finally issue an arrest warrant for him on charges of femicide. However, the man's whereabouts remained unknown. By spring 2021, the remaining participants in the commissioned perpetration of Perez were found and arrested. Notably, one of them was already serving a sentence for another crime at the time. Also, during extensive searches, the weapon used to make the fatal shots was found. In total, 9 people associated with the same criminal group were detained, 7 of whom were directly involved in chasing and shooting Abril. Almost 5 years after the woman's death, the main culprit and client of the crime, Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez, remains at large, with his whereabouts still undetermined. The individual who pulled the trigger, ending the life of a mother of 3, was sentenced to 52 years in prison. 2 other criminals who chased the car and coordinated the shooter's actions were also sentenced to 50 years each. The other arrested participants of the incident are still under investigation, and their fate has yet to be decided. Elusive hopes. In the spring of 1999, the community of Southport in the United Kingdom was split into 2 camps. The media and television were filled with numerous interviews with Mitchell Key, a man who, though unremarkable at first, had become a true folk hero. His sudden popularity was sparked by a scandal, the mysterious disappearance of his wife, Lindsay Wilson. One day, she left home without a trace, leaving behind 2 young children. Her distraught husband appeared worried and abandoned, pleading for her to reconsider and return. Along the way, he shared details of their marital life, occasionally speaking unfavorably about his spouse. He believed her behavior was driven by a desire for a free and extravagant lifestyle. Mitchell mentioned seeing his former beloved driving around town in an expensive car, although she just passed by. Most likely, the grief-stricken mother had left her children for a wealthy fiancé. Despite the image portrayed on TV in reality, he was enjoying a bachelor's life. As a result, one segment of the population sympathized with the lonely man, offering him attention and support. The other doubted him and suspected him of a horrendous crime. While Mitchell enjoyed widespread attention, law enforcement continued to search for the missing woman. His persona did not inspire trust, and there were complications in the case. According to Lindsay's relatives and friends, the couple's relationship was different from what her husband claimed. Everyone who knew her considered her a faithful wife and caring mother. Therefore, they were convinced something terrible must have happened to Lindsay. Otherwise, she would have made contact long ago. Suspicion was fueled by Mitchell's words during a famous talk show. When the host asked if he had ended his wife's life, his guest said he would not respond to such an indecent question, then paused and added, "Wait and find out." What was the exemplary husband and father implying? Perhaps he knew more than he shared, or was he so confident in his innocence that he was just waiting for everything to fall into place? Answers to these and other questions are forthcoming. Stockholm Syndrome. This is a shocking story about the terrible consequences of Stockholm Syndrome. The term refers to the traumatic bond between an aggressor and a victim, resulting in the victims sympathizing with their aggressor and often defending and justifying their actions. A decade ago, this phenomenon was examined through the lens of the relationship between a criminal and a hostage. However, today it has become widely recognized in the context of domestic relationships, explaining the behavior of a spouse enduring physical and emotional abuse from their partner. Typically, the wife adopts the role of the victim and the husband the tyrant. In most cases, domestic Stockholm Syndrome arises among individuals with a sacrificial mindset, attracting narcissistic characters whom they wish to heal and empower. And to ensure their tormentors do not feel alone, they are ready to share their pain. Let's not delve too deeply into psychology. The essence remains the same. Often, those who become victims of abuse are kind-hearted and empathetic people. Lindsay Wilson was one of them, a young woman who wanted to love and be loved. Her primary mistake was that she failed to recognize the object of her adoration in time. And as time passed, she struggled to escape from their codependent relationship. Lindsay's story. At 17, Lindsay discovered she was pregnant. Raised in a caring, large family, she hadn't imagined becoming a mother so early. She wasn't unprepared emotionally, but the fact that her boyfriend, with whom she'd been since she was 13, fled as soon as he learned about the impending fatherhood both upset and scared her. Lindsay knew all too well the physical and financial demands of motherhood. The Wilson family, though loving and close-knit, had often faced financial challenges. To provide for their children, Her parents worked tirelessly. Therefore, when Lindsay met Mitchell Quee 5 months into her pregnancy, she considered it a gift of fate. Mitchell, a 20-year-old, acted like a true gentleman, being attentive and caring. Most importantly, her delicate condition did not deter him. Mitchell assured her he had fallen in love with Lindsay at first sight and wanted to spend his life with her and raise the child as his own. At that time, he was earning well and even started working extra hours so his beloved would want for nothing. The young couple's parents were shocked when they announced their decision to marry. They felt the 5-week-old relationship hadn't withstood the test of time and circumstances, and thus couldn't genuinely celebrate for them. The only thing Lindsay's relatives noted was that her former cheerfulness and good health had returned. At the same time, the new boyfriend seemed overly sweet to them, even cloyingly polite. Ultimately, no one interfered with their marriage, keeping their doubts to themselves. Red flag. The wedding took place in August 1995 within a close family circle. The majority of the guests were from the bride's side. The groom's side was represented by no more than 5 people: his parents, a brother, and 2 friends. During the celebration, Lindsay was ecstatic, believing she had won the lottery in life. However, the uneasy premonitions of Lindsay's relatives grew heavier when, by the end of the evening, the newlyweds had a dispute. The conflict unfolded before everyone's eyes. Something displeased Mitchell, and he started to shout loudly. It was unlikely that the reason was significant or appropriate for such a reaction. During the argument, he grabbed his new wife by the hand and started shaking her, which looked more than odd and threatening. Lindsay tried to calm him down. When the emotions subsided, the man apologized to everyone and later made light of the incident, emphasizing that it was just nerves due to the holiday bustle. At that moment, the girl did not give due attention to the situation and quickly forgot about it. However, in reality, it became one of the red flags in their toxic relationship. Diligent specialist. On February 5, 1999, a social worker officially reported Lindsay Quee missing, expressing concern over being unable to reach her client. Lindsay had sought psychological support in a short period of their life together due to recurring incidents of domestic violence, and had bravely reported the situation at home. After her disclosure, the social worker had been monitoring the young family. She informed the police that she had been unable to contact Mrs. Quee for several weeks. Every time she visited the home, Lindsay's husband would answer the door, and he was also the first to answer any phone calls. The dedicated worker mentioned that she repeatedly asked to speak directly to Lindsay, but received evasive excuses. During her visits, she consistently left her contact details, yet Lindsay never called back. The social worker found this situation unsafe and requested a welfare check. Law enforcement responded to the report and visited the address, but were also unable to speak with Lindsay. Her husband Mitchell explained that he had not seen his wife at home for a long time, but did not consider her missing. According to him, on Christmas Eve, Lindsay had gone to a party with a friend and returned home early in the morning, somewhat intoxicated. They had an argument afterwards. Lindsay then packed her belongings and left without saying goodbye to the children. He claimed she left him for another man and no longer wanted any contact. Search efforts. The search for Lindsay began. During conversations with her relatives, officers learned that she was last seen by her family on December 11th, appearing in high spirits and looking well, and her behavior was normal. Her family had grown accustomed to her troubled marriage. Lindsay's mother also reported that she had tried multiple times to reach her daughter on December 24th to arrange a visit to give Christmas gifts to the grandchildren. Unable to reach Lindsay, she decided to visit in person. That day, Mitchell answered the door with the children and told her that his wife had left with friends and accused her of infidelity. However, Mrs. Wilson had long learned to take her son-in-law's words with a grain of salt. After giving the gifts to the children, she left. Detectives found it strange that no one had been concerned about the young woman's well-being for 2 months. However, there was an explanation. Everyone knew that Mitchell restricted his wife's interactions with the outside world, even with close relatives. They had previously experienced difficulty communicating with her. Therefore, it was plausible for Lindsay to drop out of sight for a while. Nonetheless, This did not mean they were not concerned about her. The news alarmed them. Everyone asserted that she did not drink and led a modest lifestyle. Moreover, her husband had forbidden her all contact with the outside world, not to mention meetings with friends and acquaintances. Inconsistencies, everything Mr. Key told the police contradicted his character profile, arousing investigators' suspicions. It seemed unlikely that Mitchell could simply let his wife go, and that Lindsay would leave her children with a tyrannical husband. However, the situation demanded a thorough investigation. To this end, the police spoke with all of Lindsay's acquaintances and tried to find anyone who had seen her after the family gathering. They also questioned neighbors and requested surveillance footage from the residential complex where the couple lived and its surroundings. Unfortunately, all footage had been deleted. By the time Lindsay's disappearance was noted, some time had elapsed. However, another date was discovered when she was last seen in person. On December 15th, she was at the local post office, sending several letters and postcards as usual. Her older sister also admitted that they met that day. Lindsay had visited despite Mitchell's disapproval. The sisters had tea and a brief conversation, after which Lindsay saw her guest out. On the way, she slipped a note into her sister's hand and asked her to read it later. The sister put the note in her purse and in the whirlwind of days, forgot about it. Regrettably, the older sister couldn't find it later, and its contents remain unknown. After that day, no one saw Lindsay again. Over several months, investigators tried to cling to any information. They began to suspect that she was no longer alive, as she had not been in contact for so long. They couldn't charge Mitchell without sufficient grounds and evidence. However, the more they learned about the couple's life history, the stronger their suspicions grew. Marriage. Shortly after their wedding, Mitchell and Lindsay decided to move away from their parents. They rented an apartment in Southport. Sometime later, Lindsay gave birth to a daughter named Robin. The only shadow over the joy of the new baby was her stepfather's volatile temper. After moving, the young wife fully experienced her husband's unstable moods. One moment he could be joking and laughing, the next he became unbalanced and aggressive. Trying to maintain a fragile peace at home, she didn't realize how completely she had submitted to his will. He controlled every step she took and caused a scene whenever she failed to hear the phone or answer a call. However, loud arguments were often followed by passionate reconciliations. Mitchell would kneel, beg for forgiveness, and profess his love. It seemed for a while that peace had returned to the family. But then, the cycle would start again. Conflict, reconciliation, repetition. Lindsay began to lose recognition of the man she loved. She often told her relatives about what was happening. They advised her to return home and end her suffering. But it was hard for the young woman to admit her mistake. In one interview, the Wilsons mentioned that she always lived with thoughts of the past. Each time, her husband assured her he would change and everything would be fine. As a loving wife, she wanted to believe him and waited for him to return to his former self, gentle and caring. Meanwhile, Mitchell increasingly tightened his grip and control. He forbade his wife to go out alone in the evenings and eventually restricted her from being anywhere without him. He was jealous of her every move, yet he himself was seen in dubious liaisons. Once, Lindsay confided to her older sister that she suspected her husband of infidelity. She told her about a woman who came to their home looking for him and was very surprised to learn he was married. That day, another argument erupted, but this time it escalated to physical violence. Gradually, physical abuse became a part of their life. To prevent his wife from complaining about him and tarnishing his reputation, the man began to limit her interactions, starting with neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, and later with her family. Despite being unhappy, Lindsay still tried to maintain contact secretly, fearing being discovered and punished. At the same time, despite the evident problems, Lindsay continued to stay with Mitchell. Along with her feelings, the comfortable life he provided was a factor. He earned well, supporting her and their child, paying the bills. She truly lacked nothing financially. Second chance. The era of living in a gilded cage came to an end for Mrs. Key when she found out she was pregnant again. At that moment, she was certain she no longer wanted more children. It's only fair to note that Mitchell was good to his stepdaughter, even loving her. However, Lindsay deemed the current circumstances unfavorable for bringing another child into the world and decided to terminate the pregnancy. When her husband learned of this, he became enraged, hurling insults and physically intimidating her. That same evening, she packed her things, took her child, and returned to her parents' home. Her family breathed a sigh of relief. There she proceeded with the pregnancy as she had planned. Over time, however, she began to miss her husband. He wouldn't leave her alone, frequently calling and begging her to come back. Mitchell tried everything to prove he had changed. Eventually, he managed to convince Lindsay. Initially, everything went well, and it seemed as if their old feelings had returned. The Keys were expecting another child. This peace lasted for 6 months until Mitchell had a severe anger outburst. Fortunately, he did not direct his rage at his pregnant wife, but took it out on the apartment. He smashed everything he could see, destroyed furniture, ripped doors off their hinges, and even stained the walls with blood and food remnants. He threw the television out of the window and smashed the car parked outside. The landlord demanded not only compensation for the damage and repairs, but also that they vacate the apartment. This situation worsened the family's financial position, requiring additional expenses. As a result, the couple had to take out a large loan and move to a more modest apartment. You can't run from yourself. In October 1997, their son Jack was born. The father adored the boy. However, the relationship between the spouses became increasingly tense. Throughout their married life, Mitchell frequently left home, sometimes for a few days, sometimes for a week, often over trivial or fabricated reasons. Lindsay had grown accustomed to her husband's behavior. Yet, when he abandoned her again, she filed for divorce and returned to her parents' home. Apparently, she realized she couldn't cope with the separation on her own. Therefore, she reached out to a local charity that assists women in difficult life situations. They helped her find subsidized housing in another city. Lindsay feared that Mitchell would discover her new address or phone number, so she took measures to distance herself from him. After he made several threats, she even obtained a restraining order from law enforcement. With the help of a therapist, she began to rebuild her life. She started a journal where she documented her life and experiences, intending to leave it to her children so they would never repeat her mistakes. The entries confirmed the relatives' claims about the difficult dynamics within the family. Despite her precautions, Mitchell discovered her phone number and incessantly called, demanding to see his son. With her newfound freedom, Lindsay felt lonely, and after a short time, she could not resist his persistence. They began communicating and seeing each other again, and eventually moved back in together. The mother of two was ashamed to admit her own weakness, so she told no one about it. Nevertheless, the secret came out. Relatives and friends were shocked and disappointed by the reunion with the tyrant. They couldn't understand why she had let him back into her life. Mitchell remained unpopular with Lindsay's relatives. They, too, wanted nothing to do with him. Ultimately, their communication nearly ceased. Despite all efforts, Lindsay repeatedly returned to the abusive relationship. Thus, her circle saw no point in trying to save her anymore, accepted the situation, and stepped back. However, this time, her decision proved to be fatal. Villain in disguise. At the outset of the investigation into Lindsay's disappearance, Mr. Key was initially helpful in the search efforts. However, as the case gained media attention, his focus shifted dramatically. He turned his misfortune into a public spectacle, becoming a media figure in the process. As Mitchell invited more journalists into his home, his abundant media appearances began to seem less genuine, with viewers often noting a smirk on his face. Lindsay's parents considered their son-in-law to be involved in their daughter's disappearance, and detectives also viewed him as the prime suspect. Yet, the lack of direct evidence tied their hands. Searches were conducted not just at the couple's home, but throughout the area. After a provocative question during a televised interview, the antagonist became even more brazen, even declaring that the time would come when his wife's family would have to apologize for their suspicions. On the eve of the holiday season, Mr. Key sent a postcard to the lead investigator on the case. Attached to it was a pack of hair dye. Instead of a festive greeting, Mitchell wrote, "I hope this covers your gray and gives you a bit more confidence," mocking the detective and displaying his own arrogance. In the media, He had already played the victim of not only marital infidelity, but also of harsh treatment by authorities. To put this upstart in his place, the investigation team gave an interview. Without revealing all the details of the case, they hinted that the well-known family man was not who he claimed to be. Tarnished reputation. In February 2000, Mitchell Key found himself at the center of a scandal. It became known that he had been forging his wife's signature to receive social benefits, serving as another indirect proof of his involvement in Lindsay's disappearance and presumed demise. The investigators wanted to latch onto a financial motive. However, the suspect's popularity worked in his favor. Many supporters emerged, arguing that as a single father, he had every right to financial assistance. These circumstances hindered the detectives' ability to bring the charges they desired. Nevertheless, they managed to charge him with fraud. Mr. Key was brought to court for the benefit fraud and was found guilty, sentenced to a month of community service. This time, Mitchell couldn't walk away unscathed. The forgery of his missing wife's signature appeared more than suspicious. The number of angry comments increased. Eventually, the man's patience snapped and he began lashing out, blaming the media for intruding into his personal life. A new beginning. The case of Lindsay Key's disappearance might have remained unsolved had it not been for a clue discovered by chance. On June 1st, 2000, a park-goer noticed his dog acting strangely near the roller coaster at a city amusement park. The animal uncovered human remains. Specialists were called to the scene, and the remains were sent for forensic examination, which revealed that they were parts of a female torso. Genetic testing confirmed they belonged to Lindsay Key, who had been missing for a long time. This breakthrough revitalized the investigation, making it clear that Lindsay had been the victim of a brutal crime. The focus now was to find the perpetrator. On June 7th, Mitchell was brought in for questioning. The detectives were determined, and after more than 36 hours of intermittent interrogation, the suspect broke down under the pressure and confessed. Dismemberment murder. On December 15th, 1998, after meeting with her sister, Lindsay informed her husband that she wanted a divorce. This time, she was resolute. According to Key, this news infuriated him, leading him to attack and strangle her. The incident occurred in front of their children. He then hid her lifeless body in their bedroom, stuffing the gap under the door to mask any odors. Realizing he couldn't dispose of the body alone, he enlisted the help of his brother Elliot, a butcher who he thought could assist. Elliot was initially hesitant, but was eventually persuaded by Mitchell. While the children played in the next room, they dismembered Lindsay's body and later dispersed her remains across the city. During his confession, the murderer expressed no remorse or empathy. Instead, he seemed proud of his actions, stating that without his confession, they would never have proven his guilt. The next day, he led them to the other locations where he had hidden her limbs. Sadly, her head and one hand were never recovered. The forensic comparison confirmed that the remains were indeed Lindsay's. There was no doubt about Mitchell's guilt. The final judgment. The trial of the Key brothers took place in January 2001. The court proceedings were swift and straightforward. Mitchell was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 17 years. The court-appointed psychiatrist noted that the defendant showed all the signs of being a narcissist with sadistic tendencies. His brother Elliot received a 7-year sentence for his role in concealing the crime. Lindsay's children were taken in by her maternal grandparents, who gave them their surname. Just 3 months after the sentence was handed down, another tragedy struck the Wilson family. One of Lindsay's older brothers, unable to cope with the shock, took his own life in the attic of their family home. In his farewell note, he wrote that he saw no point in continuing in such a cruel world and wished to reunite with his sister. As of 2017, Mitchell Key has been eligible for parole. However, as of January 2023, his lawyers have been denied 3 times. The Wilsons, including the children, are concerned that the murderer might eventually be released. Consequently, they have started a petition urging that he remain incarcerated. As long as the voices of the victim's family are considered, the criminal will continue to serve his sentence. Regardless, no punishment can bring Lindsay back. In an interview, Mr. Wilson mentioned hearing rumors that his former relative had attempted to end his life. He added that he sincerely hopes the murderer will try again and succeed this time. Experience shows that most women with domestic Stockholm syndrome try to adapt to their abusers throughout their lives. Even when their families come to their aid, they continue to act against their own best interests. In such cases, only deep self-reflection and psychotherapy can help. If the victim does not come to realize the recklessness of their actions, the end of the relationship will be dire.
According to statistics, approximately 30% of violent crimes committed around the world remain unsolved, despite the rapid development of technology and techniques, as well as the creation of extensive DNA databases. As a rule, most of these crimes are solved on hot tracks, but there are cases when the investigation lasts for years or even decades before the perpetrator is punished. But the Ellen Ray Greenberg case, which we will look at in this video, is interesting in that for many years of investigation, it has hardly moved forward. The case has been investigated with numerous irregularities, and over time, there are more questions than answers. The brutal murder of a young woman to this day remains a mystery, and what is remarkable is that the investigation is trying hard to prove that the cheerful Ellen, who was enthusiastically preparing for her own wedding, suddenly decided to leave her life. But let's try to understand everything in order. Who is Ellen Ray Greenberg? Ellen was born in New York in June 1993 in the family of Sanna and George Greenberg. She was the only child of her parents, growing up in love and care. During high school, the girl was actively engaged in team sports and even gave hope as a promising athlete. She was an active, restless, and sociable child, but at the same time studied well, showing a special interest in the humanities. After graduating from high school, Ellen became a student at Pennsylvania State University, where she received a degree in public relations. But having started working on a specialty, Greenberg realized that this is not what she would like to devote her life to. Parallel to work, the girl enrolled in the correspondence department of the Pedagogical Institute. A few years later, she brilliantly defended her diploma and moved to Philadelphia, where she was hired to work in one of the local schools as a junior high school teacher. According to relatives, Ellen's life was going great. She was full of enthusiasm, made big plans for the future, and simply adored her work and small students. At the same time, Ellen met a boy with whom she had a torrid affair, and soon they began to prepare for their wedding. The girl's favorite was a young man named Samuel, or just Sam, Goldberg. He was from a fairly wealthy and well-known family in the city. His parents owned their own large business, and his uncle had a reputation as one of the best lawyers in the state. The young men met in 2009 at a party, thanks to their mutual acquaintances, and immediately liked each other. The friendly interaction quickly turned into a rapidly developing romantic relationship, and soon they decided to move in together and live together. On the eve of 2011, Sam made his beloved a proposal, which was the best gift for the new year. He gave her a beautiful diamond ring, and the couple began to prepare for the upcoming wedding, which was scheduled for the spring of the same year. Family members of both young people took the news with joy, and it seemed that the happiness of lovers can no longer interfere with anything. Ellen plunged headlong into the pleasant troubles associated with the wedding, making lists of guests and sending them invitations, choosing a venue and elements of decor for the event, trying on wedding dresses, trying to create their ideal image, and planning a honeymoon. It is noteworthy that almost all these issues the bride was engaged in independently, and the groom did not visibly participate in the process. But loved ones did not attach much importance to this, and Helen never complained. True, there were some oddities, to which everyone paid attention only after the tragedy occurred. In January 2011, the weather in the city was very snowy and frosty. On the 26th, Ellen went to work at school as usual. But close to noon, there was a strong wind and a blizzard, so classes were canceled and students and teachers were sent home. Ellen returned to the apartment she and Sam shared. It was in a cozy apartment complex located in one of the quiet areas of the city. Soon Sam returned home as well. According to some reports, the couple that day quarreled, which was mentioned in passing, and Sam himself, but later he began to deny it. Close to 5 p.m., Sam decided to go to the gym located in the same apartment complex. He was gone for less than 1 hour, but when he returned, he could not get into the apartment because the door was locked from the inside. Sam first knocked loudly and insistently, then began calling his fiancée by name, which attracted the attention of neighbors, and then began calling her on the phone and sending messages. No one responded to his yelling, knocking, and calling, but it was heard that the phone was inside the apartment. Sam then went to the first floor of the building to the security guard to ask for help. Samuel explained the situation to him and asked if it was possible to open the front door, to which the guard replied that this was beyond his authority and that he could not leave his post by instruction. Then Sam went back up to his floor and decided to act on his own. He slammed his shoulder into the door, and the first time he did it, he managed to break the latch. It was quiet inside, Ellen's call was never answered, and when he entered the kitchen, he saw a gruesome sight. His fiancée was sitting on the floor, leaning back against the cabinet door, her body slashed with a knife and her clothes stained with blood. Sam immediately started calling emergency services, describing the situation, and when asked to check if the girl had a pulse, he acted strangely, asking several times if he really needed to do that. Then there was silence, and afterward Sam suddenly stated that there was a knife sticking out in his fiancée's chest, which, allegedly, he had not noticed before.
He also added that Ellen was obviously already dead. The police officers who arrived on the call were quite surprised and noted that they had never seen such a thing in their many years of practice. The door was indeed locked from the inside with a latch, which Sam had subsequently knocked off with his shoulder. There were no signs of forced entry or the presence of intruders in the room. Nothing had been stolen from the apartment. All valuables and money were still there. Nothing had been searched or touched. But the most interesting thing began when the body of the dead girl was examined. No signs of struggle or attempts to defend herself were found, as if everything happened suddenly and the victim simply did not have time to react. On her body counted about 24 stab wounds of varying depth, and the final blow came to the heart, and it took Ellen's life. We will return to the blatant negligence with which the crime scene and the body of the deceased were examined a little later. This negligence allowed a lot of evidence to be missed and left a possible perpetrator at large. But even more strange was the behavior of the police, who even before the medical examination thought that Ellen had done this to herself: panic attacks, visits to a psychologist, and prescription drugs. In favor of the version of voluntary departure from life was the fact that Ellen, since some time, began to suffer from anxiety disorder and panic attacks arising on its background. The situation was so serious that Ellen even sought help from a psychologist. Close, she tried not to complain, so as not to worry them, and relatives in turn associated changes in Ellen's behavior with stress and excitement before the wedding. However, the specialist who worked with Ellen prescribed her 2 medications, which she took regularly to combat her anxiety. As the psychologist himself would later report, neither of these drugs, neither together nor separately, could in any way aggravate Ellen's mental state and cause thoughts of death. The specialist also noted that despite her anxiety, the patient never had such thoughts. In addition, Ellen's friends and colleagues noticed that after she and Sam started living together, her behavior began to change. In addition to becoming anxious and restless, Ellen almost stopped making any decisions on her own. In every situation, Ellen would say that she needed to discuss it with her fiancé, that she couldn't give an answer without consulting him. Similar oddities noticed, and parents of the deceased, but every time her daughter tried to complain to them about her difficult emotional state, she added that Sam had nothing to do with it. And 3 weeks before the tragedy, Ellen told her mother that she wanted to quit school, drop everything, and return to her parents' house. Her mother was very surprised at her daughter's words, but assured her that she could return home at any time, and her parents would accept her without question. However, Ellen never brought up the subject again. Later, it was hypothesized that after the couple moved in together, Sam began to show violence towards his fiancée, and she was scared, afraid to tell anyone about it. The psychologist Ellen consulted did not confirm or deny this version, but noted that Ellen had difficulty articulating and expressing what she was experiencing and what was bothering her. It was as if she wanted to share something important, but the fear was stronger than that. Oddities and inconsistencies in the case. This unusual case from the very beginning raised a lot of questions, but most interestingly, no one even tried to find answers to them,
The carelessness with which the examination of the crime scene and the body was conducted, as well as the expertise, is simply astounding. Many circumstances, facts, and evidence were simply ignored and irretrievably lost, and without them it was impossible to restore the full picture of the incident. To begin with, on the hands of the victim, was not found typical for self-defense injuries, which means that the girl was not trying to defend herself. But at the same time, on her body revealed numerous hematomas, which, judging by the degree of healing she received several weeks ago, the fiancé explained that these are most likely the consequences from playing team sports. However, Ellen's parents assured that their daughter had not visited gyms and playgrounds for a very long time because of the workload at work, as well as active preparations for the wedding. No suicide message was found. Ellen looked like a victim of a brutal massacre, but despite this, almost immediately a version of voluntary departure from life was voiced. Moreover, there were food, spices, and a cutting board on the table in the kitchen. So, according to the logic of the investigators, Ellen started to cook dinner, but suddenly changed her mind and decided to cut herself to death with a knife. Further, as I have already noted, on the body of the victim counted 24 penetrating wounds of varying depth, and forensic examinations showed that 10 of them were inflicted from the back, so if the girl was attacked from behind, and some of them were serious enough, and if they did not kill Ellen immediately, then certainly deprived her of the ability to move and resist. It is simply impossible to inflict such injuries on oneself, and then to stick a knife into one's heart to the hilt, and this caused medical experts to doubt the originally announced cause of death. However, despite this conclusion, the investigation continued to insist on the previous version and refused to initiate criminal proceedings. The main argument was the absence of traces of strangers in the apartment, as well as the absence of signs of self-defense. By the way, there were also some doubts about the possibility of penetration into the apartment, because the latch on the inner part of the door was also very peculiar. It could be closed from the outside, but not completely. If the latch had been closed from the inside all the way, it would have been impossible to break it out with a single blow of the shoulder without damaging the doorway. But, judging by the nature of the damage, it was only partially closed, and it could have been done from outside the door. Although the victim's spouse or partner is usually the prime suspect in such cases, Sam has always remained above suspicion. No charges were brought against him, and it was only on the day of the incident that he was interviewed at the station in the presence of his uncle, who, as already mentioned, was a well-known and influential lawyer. Moreover, the whole picture and sequence of events of that day was reconstructed only according to the words of Sam Goldberg, who at times was confused in his own testimony, but wrote everything off as stress. Neighbors confirmed only that they heard the knocking and screaming of a guy who could not get into the apartment and called his fiancée, but that's all. Sam further claimed during his testimony that he went to the security guard for help, and the guard went upstairs with him and saw him kicking down the door. But the guard denied this information, saying that he had not left his post. Strangely enough, but the investigation did not return to this issue, considering this detail irrelevant. A recording from only one surveillance camera leading to the gym was also checked. It shows Sam walking towards the gym and then walking back. But in the interval between these two events, he could well have gone out through another passage and then returned to the gym in the same way. However, his alibi was not checked, and possible witnesses who could confirm that he had been working out or deny it were not even looked for. Sam did not call the police until an hour later, after he found the door locked and his fiancée unresponsive to knocking and shouting. In addition, the officer who took the call noted that Sam was acting strangely. Despite the fact that he was screaming and wailing, the specialist thought that it was a feigned panic because Samuel was calm enough to answer questions and his voice was not shaking. When he was asked to start resuscitative measures, he first doubted the need to do so, then quieted down, and then, and after all, reported about a knife sticking out of his girlfriend's chest, which earlier he allegedly did not notice. It is noteworthy that before calling the police, the guy called his parents and his lawyer uncle, who arrived at the apartment before the police. To the station to testify, as already mentioned, Sam also went together with his uncle. In addition, The next day, Sam went back to the sealed apartment with the same uncle to get some personal belongings and took out all of Ellen's gadgets. They took 2 laptops, a phone, and a tablet of the deceased. When the investigation suddenly decided to check these devices a few days later, it turned out that the search queries included topics related to voluntary demise. The police officers who arrived at the scene made only a cursory examination of the scene and concluded that Ellen had taken her own life. Subsequently, despite the emergence of new details, they refused to change their verdict. The order of the wounds could not be established, but it is certain that the final blow was a blow to the heart. The medical examiner who conducted the autopsy found all this very strange, and he decided to conduct his own additional investigation, sending a sample of the spine of the deceased to a highly specialized specialist who could give a conclusion regarding the integrity of the spinal cord. If the spinal cord was damaged, then Ellen would be paralyzed and unable to stab herself in the heart. But soon the expert miraculously changed his mind and abandoned his investigation, stating that according to his report, the spinal cord had not been damaged. However, the conclusion itself was never attached to the case materials. It also didn't bother anyone that with such numerous and extensive wounds on Ellen's body, there was very little blood around, which could indicate that someone had wiped it off. But no one even bothered to look for possible washed-away marks. The luminol used in such cases was simply ignored. The trash cans in the apartment were also not examined, and if there was any evidence in them, they were lost forever. The unhappy parents were informed of the death of their only daughter by the Goldberg family, for they were the first on the scene. Ellen's family lived in another town, a couple 100 miles away from their daughter, but they arrived as quickly as they could. Santa and George couldn't believe what was happening and flatly denied that Ellen could have taken her own life. But the grief-stricken parents were never given a clear answer to the question of what happened that night with their daughter, only a dry conclusion and refusal to initiate criminal proceedings. Then the Greenbergs decided to conduct their own investigation with the involvement of independent specialists. Soon they were contacted by a private detective who offered his help completely free of charge because he himself wanted to understand this confusing case. The detective studied the materials and came to the conclusion that Ellen's body was moved after her death. This was evidenced by a dried blood trickle from her nose toward her ear. But Ellen was found in a sitting position, so the blood couldn't have traveled that way. He also found smeared stains on the floor, very similar to drag marks. In addition, after a second one, the guard remembered that Sam, who had asked for help, was wearing a tracksuit and said he had come back from the gym, but he was wearing boots. He did not have a bag with a change of shoes with him. But despite the new evidence and witness testimony, the parents of the deceased were again denied a criminal case or further investigation. The Greenbergs were even denied case files, including a recording of Sam's phone call to the police, as well as surveillance footage showing the time he walked toward the gym and then returned from there. 4 years later, a new young officer has joined the county's homicide unit, taking a position as an assistant prosecutor. He had heard about the unsolved, strange case while he was still studying at the university, and now he decided to get materials from the archives and get to the truth. His attention was drawn to the injury to the back of the head, which could be the first to indicate that Ellen had been attacked from behind when she hadn't expected it. Also of interest to him was the note that there was no spinal cord injury, but there was no official document to prove it. All of the ADA's attempts to find any report regarding the spinal injuries were unsuccessful. It was allegedly lost somewhere in the archives. Then he made an official request to the Center of Forensic Medical Examination to get a duplicate of the document. And then it turned out that no one had ever given such a conclusion, and the body was not examined for spinal cord injuries. At the same time, a fragment of the spine had somehow miraculously been preserved and could be re-examined. An independent specialist was brought in and determined that the spinal cord had been damaged in several places at once, so that Ellen could not have inflicted further injuries on herself. The resulting materials were passed to the police, but there, after reviewing them, again refused to initiate criminal proceedings. In 2018, the coroner gave an official conclusion, which stated that all 20 wounds the deceased had inflicted on herself, and there can be no doubt about it. New investigation
Once again, at a stalemate of justice, the grief-stricken parents hired a new attorney with whom they recollected all the documents, previously unrecorded evidence, facts, and witness statements. In 2019, they filed a new lawsuit against the coroner and experts who had improperly done their jobs and effectively collapsed the case. The following spring, the lawsuit was heard and settled, but trials never began due to the pandemic raging around the world. It was expected that the case would be reclassified, but due to the negligence of the police and medical examiners, as well as the resulting confusion, crucial evidence was lost and irretrievably lost. The parents of the dead girl even created a page in the social network dedicated to the progress of the investigation, where they share official materials, new details, and versions. Family, friends, and colleagues of Ellen insist that she could not take her own life, and even do it in such a heinous way. Ellen, in principle, did not tolerate the sight of blood. It made her sick, and she also had a low pain threshold, because of which she has never done tattoos or piercings. In the summer of 2022, the case was dismissed again, but the Greenbergs got it transferred to the district attorney's office, where a new prosecutor took over. The investigation began again, 11 years after those terrible events. But to this day, the investigation has never been finalized. How did Sam's fate turn out? For the first year after the tragedy, Samuel tried to keep in touch with his estranged father-in-law and mother-in-law. However, he did not take any part in the investigations initiated by them. He flatly refused to communicate with the police, and it seemed that he was not interested in the case. He himself adhered to the official version that his fiancée himself inflicted fatal injuries. Goldberg soon found solace with another girl, and just a year later married her. Together with his wife, he moved to another state and stopped contact with the Greenberg family. Now he and his wife are raising 2 children together, and about the dead ex-fiancée, Sam tries not to remember. What do you guys think? Is Sam responsible for Ellen's death?